Welcome to Real Estate Radio Live, an informative and engaging podcast discussing everything you need to know about the world of real estate. Your host, Joe Cucchiara, provides you with insight and guidance on how to buy, sell, finance, and invest in real estate. He also offers real estate tax management strategies, new construction advice, home improvement tips, and much, much more. And now, to guide you around the world of real estate, here's your host and Real Estate Radio Live team leader, Joe Cucchiara.
Welcome in, Joe Cucchiara with Real Estate Radio Live. Thank you for those that have continued to watch us and follow us on Facebook. We appreciate that very much. With our limited schedule, so to speak, back and forth with COVID-19, most of you know we're doing podcasts usually twice a week, sometimes 3 days a week, and we want to continue to provide the education information to you, the consumer. That's what we've been doing for almost 11 years now with our live radio show and our podcast. And the focus has really always been the same for us, for those that follow the show. Hopefully pass this along to others that may be interested. But the focus for us is really the objective has been to educate and inform. So we work really hard to have great guests like today and other topics, and really with the effort to inform and educate the consumer on whatever topic it is. It's a real estate related show. However, we also do a lot of community shows. We do shows with business in general. We also do giving back segments, legal segments, a lot of different things to do with business in general. So with that, let me invite my guest then. Mr. Dan Foss is with us today, and we've been trying to connect for some time. Got some great strategies for primarily small business owners, but let him take the stage and invite him in. Dan, thanks for being with us today. If you could tell us a little bit about your background and we'll get started. Thanks again.
Joe, thanks for having me on your show. I've been in financial services working with small business owners, closely held companies for close to 24, 25 years now. A lot of what we do is just helping individuals to identify and prioritize planning goals that are important to them. We are typically just one of a group of people on a team to help out with advising. And our focus tends to be a little bit longer term for individuals. A lot of times having an eye on what they call exit strategy planning, or how to get out of a business as a professional. As a small business owner, there's some challenges to that because you're not publicly traded. A lot of times the product is as good as you, especially in the real estate environment or community, and mortgage lenders. Those folks tend to carry the client base for 20, 30, 40 years. It's a lot of times hard for those folks to retire too, because their phone will continue to ring, which will, you don't turn down business, even if you're 65, 70, 75 years old, you'll still pick that phone up because of the relationships you've built.
That's a good point. So I think what you're saying, is that a lot of small business owners, and, myself included, is that you kind of start down this path, you work real hard, you build this database, this client, referral, loyalty, on and on. And so the plan, or I guess hopefully the strategy, is to create value along the way. So there is something there whenever the end is, or this transition is, so you could recognize and realize some value for your business, right?
Yeah, and if you have a track record, with some time behind you, a lot of times a service company is valued most times, one-time revenue, depending on how strong it is. You might be able to maybe go 1.5 times revenue. That's true for even a practice like my own, as well as a service type of a program. But when you build up that goodwill value, if you're able to actually get money from the relationships you have, from the client base you have, that is a tangible asset. That's something that can be sold, or there's some value derived from that, especially if you're able to bring up somebody who's a little bit younger or junior as you're starting to exit or transfer out of a business. It might be 10 or 15 years younger. Then you can teach them, the methods that you've used yourself to be successful, and pass that on. In the event that you don't have somebody to pass that business, or book a business off to, again, that's when most of those people will continue to pick up the phone. For instance, my father-in-law is an architect. He's in his mid-late 70s, and he just goes and goes. He's like, well, the phone calls, people want some work. Why not do it?
Yeah,
but
that makes sense.
You retire, though, by force or by choice. So even, as I mentioned, for my father-in-law, we kind of laugh about that. At one point, they're either going to ask you to leave, or you're not going to be able to perform as you do in the past. And what's important about that is just to make sure that you're dialed in from a retirement perspective. And even if you continue to move forward and generate a business and help clients, understanding where that proverbial line in the sand is what you need to build up as a nest egg to retire.
Right.
And again, that might tell you how hard you have to work, or how important it is, or what a lot of times it highlights for people is helping them to understand they don't have to take unnecessary risk, especially if they're on track and they are putting money away and they are in good shape financially.
That makes sense. So when do you typically, I guess it just depends, when would you suggest people start engaging or having conversations with someone like yourself? Would that be 5+ years before, a couple of years before, or does it just depend on the business or the individual? How would you suggest that, or how would that work?
Well, businesses have a life cycle just like an individual does or professional. When you start out in life, in your late 20s is about the point in time when you think you might be 38 or 48 at some point. So millennial people are a little bit more challenging because you tend to focus, 3, 4, 5 years out. When you get people in their mid 30s or later, those are folks that are thinking over, a trajectory of, between 35 and 65. What can I do for myself to put things in place? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people that move up into retirement that do not have a strategy. They haven't talked to anybody. Where the value comes in there is just to understand the cash flow mechanics, what you need. So simple, monthly budget expense report will help to dial in what you need either in monthly or annually. Then when you bake in the Social Security and whatever else you might have in there, if you've got a spouse or a significant other, you can always include that in the formula, how it looks together from a planning perspective. But all ages are appropriate to look at it. The disadvantage is most people get busy in their day-to-day lives, whether it's through work or through their family. They put blinders on and they focus on work and they focus on their family. And at some point they think, wait a minute, what am I doing for myself? How am I dialing in my own planning for myself? Right. And it's a good idea to slow down maybe once every year or so, every couple of years, and really kind of self-evaluate if you're on track, all different levels. Your investment asset allocation, your risk management, insurance, your estate planning. If you have a business partner or the ability to transition your business, how can you create value out of that? Yeah. If you make $200,000-300,000 a year, is there a way to sell that to somebody over a 2-3 year period and have them take over that business just to add a little bit more to the feathering your nest? Yeah.
So if you have, obviously there's thousands of people listening to the podcast every month, but we kind of piece it together, compartmentalize it, so to speak. I guess my question would be, if I'm out there listening to the podcast and I'm just getting started, I'm fairly new in my business, whatever business that might be, I'm in my late 20s or maybe early 30s, things are really starting to kind of ramp up. It's exciting. I'm starting to see some good income. What are some of the things you would say to that person at that stage of the game? Because let's face it, we're all in our 20s and 30s at once. You always think things are going to last forever. You're going to be young forever. All those things are coming to your mind, right? I remember that. I remember when I was in my 20s looking at guys my age and go, oh my God, how old is that guy now? So I guess what would you tell that young guy or gal right now where they could get a potential head start and really maybe start thinking of some of this stuff early?
Really thinking about the foundation of your planning. It's like building a house. You want to make sure that foundation is solid and which to build everything on top of. And when you go to a cocktail party or something, it's easy to start talking about investments or the good things that are happening. I've got a friend who gambles quite a bit, and you only hear about his times when he comes back and when he wins. Right. When you say, hey, you got home early, you don't hear any speaking about what the experience was like. Right. But when you think of yourself as a pyramid, your financial planning, like a house like that, the bottom of that's going to be risk management or risk protection or risk-based. That's going to include wills and trust. When you have a young family, you're starting out, you want to make sure you got your estate planning in place. Your needs are probably bigger at that point in your life. When you buy your first house, start out with a young baby or a family, you've got a lot of people that are dependent on you at that point in time. And while those needs might be the biggest in your lifetime as far as supporting and protecting everybody else, cash flow is probably most limited. So you have to kind of balance in there what you can do for yourself. But again, similar to somebody in their 50s or 60s doing cash flow analysis, it's just trying to understand what your capabilities are to save for yourself, to do planning outside of paying your mortgage, your cell phone bill, and all these fixed costs. And so by dialing in the bottom of that financial pyramid, that protection piece, you create a solid foundation in which to build on top of. And you would layer on top of that, like your business and your home and other things higher up in that pyramid. So really focusing on the protection piece, building up cash reserves. And what that means to people in their working years is if you're a single income household, you want about 6 months in cash reserves. And if you're a dual income household, the general rule of thumb is about 3 months. So you want to have that on top of that protection piece. A lot of Americans don't have appropriate cash. They talk about the fact that, people are one check away from, if there's a disaster and they need a roof on the house, a new car, that they wouldn't be able to make that bridge. So by having cash in place, it allows you to not only handle an emergency that comes up, but also potential opportunities that you wouldn't necessarily be able to take advantage of. And if you use that money, whether it's an opportunity or emergency, you want to replenish it right away. And so if you think of that pyramid, the protection at the bottom, build up some cash reserves, and then right above that, again, is going to be your business, your home, your 401k. And so a lot of people, it's easier to talk about the investment side, the home, but then you end up with the pyramid that's out of balance. You end up with more focus and thought on the growth side of it with no protection pieces. And that's really building that defense. And if you have debt as well, some people are dealing with student loans. That's a big burden for people in their late 20s and early 30s. They're coming out $200,000 of student loans, but really having a strategy on how to attack that debt, how to handle that debt. And that comes through that cash flow exercise of understanding what your capabilities are. And then when you figure out what that debt picture looks like, it may seem intuitive, but you want to go after the ones with the highest interest rate and the ones that are least tax favorable, and start attacking and hammering on that debt. As you knock down that debt, it'll give you more strength and more wherewithal to accumulate and build up the top part of your pyramid, which is the accumulation side, building up your wealth.
Yeah, I mean, just the planning, I know you hear it a lot, and I know you focus on it a lot, but there's the idea of planning is so important. We all hear it a lot. I was fortunate enough to, get some decent advice from a couple of people I trusted in my mid-20s when I bought my home when I was 27, and I started that whole concept of really trying to save and invest at least 10 to 15% of everything you make. But so you hear that a lot, Dan. I mean, you hear that every day. I mean, I don't care if it's a TV or online or reports or financial shows, but that is really, how do you, I guess the question is, because of what you just said, so many people, I forget what the number is it, I lose track, you probably know better. Is it 70, 80% of people are not even close to being prepared for retirement? And very few people actually are in a place where they could retire or they're on track. Is that right? I mean, it's a small percentage still, isn't it?
It's a little bit bigger margin than that. There's a Social Security statistic, and interesting enough, there's the same numbers that came out from Harvard MBA program. And Social Security says that there's about 97% of Americans are not appropriately prepared, or they can do more for themselves than they have been. They had a similar type of thing at Harvard where they determined that about 3% of the class outperformed the other 97%. So you got all these MBAs from Harvard that have some of the best minds coming out of advanced degrees for college, and they all have equal opportunity. So how did that 3% outperform the other 97%? And one of the things they attributed to was planning, or if you could say lack of planning, whichever side you're sitting on.
Yeah, right.
And so the ones that created the 3% that far out achieved the other 97%, it's because they kept revising their plans. They kept having this evolving, rolling 5-year plan. And as things would start out, they would nail those goals, and they would have a whole new set of goals, whether they be personal or financial. I remember starting out in college, writing my mission statement, and one of the things, I had a car that didn't have air conditioning, and you get to a meeting and it'd be hot, and you get in the meeting and you're cooking, say hi to people. So one of the things was, I'm going to get a car with cool leather seats and air conditioning. And when you visualize that, or you stay these goals out and you list them and you see them and you go back to them and visit them, there's a much higher probability that you're going to achieve those, because you can feel it, you can taste it, you're going for it.
Along those same lines, in someone, what would be your suggestion? I guess what I'm trying to say is, because it's so difficult, as much as we hear it, obviously the majority of us do not practice it, exercise it, or execute it. So what would you say? Is it an illustration? Is it a visual thing? if you're telling someone in their 20s or 30s today, because let's face it, when you tell someone, I discuss it with my daughters all the time, and I see, even though they're doing it, I could see in their eyes they're going, yeah, right, Dad's just talking. But when I tell them about it, saving and investing 10, 15, 20%, because it's so small, Dan, so early, right? So what kind of suggestions, ideas, thoughts, things would you say to someone to really, hopefully, have that hit home more about the compounding interest and the fact that, yeah, even though it's $20 to $50 a month now, you know, as you start making more money and that increases, and then over 10, 15, 20, 30 years, how do you get that a message across where it's impactful?
As you mentioned, when you speak to your kids, that sometimes it's falling on deaf ears.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's maturity and time that helps that message to resonate.
Okay.
When they're telling you in your 20s about the 21-year-old that started an IRA and his friend started at 31, the 31-year-old just barely catches up to him by mid-50s because of the 10 extra years of compounding.
Okay.
It doesn't mean anything to a 20-something-year-old because they're focused on the next day or the next hour, what's right in front of them. When you talk about saving money, one of the things that's good to talk about is, as you're saving it, what's the intent or the purpose behind it? So sometimes people talk about envelope accounting or bucket accounting. So when you're talking to a teenager or a 20-year-old about putting money away, that 20%, you want to have them kind of put those in separate buckets. What out of this 20%, one part of this money is long-term, part of it's short-term because I'm going on a vacation, and budget the rest for mad money if it's 80% or more or whatever it is. But when you start to save money, really identify what's the intent or the purpose behind it. What are we trying to achieve here? And when you talk about retirement for a 20-year-old, it's like 2 lifetimes away, literally. When you talk about saving money, midterm for the next 3 years, so you can go on a trip to Mexico or to the tropics, they see the power of saving. They see the benefit, the short, that because even though it's only a 2 or 3 year time frame to save up for this trip, they get the value of saving because they're going to have a life experience. And when they go, it's going to be that much sweeter. It's going to be that much nicer because they have a direct involvement in the financing of making it happen for themselves. Yeah,
very good. Do you get involved much with the formation of businesses? Like, do you have ideas for people whether they should be self-employed? You have sole proprietorships, you have corporations, you have S corps, C corps.
You'll have tax advisors in various industries, and they'll have a good sense of what type of corporation is the most suitable for your organization.
Okay.
There's different reasons. For instance, if you put an LLC around something, like if you have a rental property, does it make sense to own that outright, have the appropriate liability insurance, or does it make sense to put that in an LLC and wrap it up for creditor protection and business planning? There's different reasons. So as you state your goals to a tax and a legal advisor, they will drive down a path and say, this is the most appropriate corporate structure or business structure for you. If you're a mortgage professional and you work as a 1099 contract employee, a lot of times you can just have the appropriate errors and omissions or liability insurance, and that's sufficient from a protection from a professional liability standpoint. But if you're growing that business and you get a partner and employees, it may make sense to wrap that in a corporate structure, either an S corp or a C corp. I do not get involved in directing people on the types of structures or corporations, but when somebody has an entity or a business structure or a sole proprietor, then we know how they can best take advantage of that structure or what they can use within their means to do benefit planning for themselves or for their employees or whatever they're trying to do.
Again, as the people are out there listening to this podcast that may be interested in contacting you or finding out a little bit more, is there a certain segment of the population, demographics? How would you describe, hey, listen, if you're this person or that person, or how would you describe the best person suited that might be able to, someone that would be better suited to work with someone like yourself?
Believe it or not, it's a similar thing I tell my kids when you're making friends. There's a couple criteria. One is not on the table when you're making a friend, but the first one, and if it's a client as well, is how do they rank in character and integrity? And it's the kind of people that care about their significant other, their spouse, their family, their business partner. They want everyone to win. They want to make sure that people are in a good shape and the best of their ability. We can have an offense and a defense around what we're trying to do. So character and integrity are huge. And I don't mean character like a clown and so forth, but it's what kind of decisions you make when people aren't around. What's your core makeup of who you are? And the next one is intelligent people. And that's not necessarily an academic criteria. That's an individual basis. I just had a conversation about Sheldon on the Big Bang Theory with somebody. He's got a higher IQ than Einstein and Bill Gates, except he's an actor. Now, it's great he makes people laugh, but I stand on the ground that he could be doing a lot more for mankind. He should be making people laugh, and he should be having people think through things like splitting atoms and whatever else that we haven't thought of that he could do. So intellectual or intelligence is not necessarily an academic criteria. It's world smarts. It's how you handle information. And the one that I also look for a client is financial ability, which I tell my kids that's not a criteria for friends. but typically people that are either individually or household making a strong six-figure income. And what I mean by that is because we live in California, they actually consider people making, 130, 150,000 in a household to be low income. When you pass that information around the country, people can't believe that you can hear that. But so again, from a demographic standpoint, working from people in their late 20s, early 30s, all the way through their 70s. Okay. So they have different life events or different things they're focused on just based on where you are in that trajectory in life. And that'll kind of correlate or dictate what you should be talking about. The type of planning that you do for personal planning or financial planning is something that it's my experience that you should be visiting that either 4, 5, 6, 7 times over your lifetime. There's major events. You buy a house, you have a child, your family expands, you start a business, you get married, you get divorced, you retire. These are all major life events which require financial planning at that point in time. But if you set the table and you're thinking about those things in advance, you can turn the screws a quarter turn instead of saying, oh my gosh, we're here, the banks are closing, the shadows are getting long, there's not much more time to do this. What can I do? And there's a lot of times there's some areas that you can move around to do some more beneficial planning. And as your pyramid grows financially speaking, it just means the more zeros on your balance sheet doesn't mean your life gets harder, but there's more complexity, there's more planning that needs to be done around that. More LLCs, more trust, more defense as you get bigger. Very good.
All right. Well, we got just a couple minutes left. I know one of the things I see on your material and that resonates with me is, and I think it's a great way to kind of, wrap things up, and then we'll give people obviously some ways to get a hold of you as well, Dan. But the idea that, and I like, the idea that planning and strategies and things like that are only for the rich or famous or wealthy people. I mean, everybody should have a plan and a strategy regardless, right? I don't care what job you are, how much you make, what you do. I mean, talk a few minutes about that before we wrap things up.
You can't overstate that enough. My mom raised 3 of us by herself as a single parent, worked for the county for 45 years. So her strategy was, take the low road, safe, got a pension plan, can have, health insurance for my kids and all that. But the one thing that's important to remember is as you build yourself personally and professionally and financially, that you take a turn inwards and see what you're doing for yourself, that you're actually getting traction, that you're moving in a positive direction. And it doesn't mean necessarily that you need to do a long-term planning, but having a feel for where you are and understanding what you're trying to avoid is equally important. Creating a level of accountability for yourself, it's not there for individuals. People aren't designed that way, very much like a business has a board of directors or a structure around it. By you putting certain advisors around you, if I can go back to that pyramid really quickly, right. You get a CPA, a short-term thinker, a tax advisor, you get an attorney, a long-term thinker like myself. Attorney's more transactional, but you have a board of advisors around you that are moving you in the right direction. So if there's gaps or any perceived shortfalls in your planning, these advisors will encourage you and say, hey, you've got something else to do. Some folks have special needs planning, and so planning is not just for the rich and the famous, especially estate planning. If people do not have estate planning, you effectively have the state of California's plan, and some people say, wait a minute, what could that possibly be? Right. And so without doing planning, you by default, you do have a plan in place. It just might not be the plan you want.
Right. Very good. Very good. Before we wrap things up, so what's the best place, or what is the best means to reach you, Dan? Would it be website, phone number, email? For those that might be interested in working with you, or maybe picking your brain a little bit, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, either email or phone contact would be appropriate, and
Okay.
I'd be happy to pass that along to you.
Yeah, go right
share
ahead.
with your listeners. And the biggest thing that I advocate for people is just to provide education. It's up to people to determine what they want to do. So there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer, unless, of course, your spouse is kicking you in the leg underneath the table. But it just, again, creating awareness for yourself and what you can do for yourself, it's empowering. It's a lot of people neglect to do that. And if you haven't done it, it's something you should do, or you should assemble a team, whether it be with someone like myself or somebody similar to myself. It's good to have that accountability around your business or around yourself.
Yeah, totally agree. Great. So give us your phone number and email, and we'll give that out to those that might be interested.
Yeah, the phone number is 408-693-0808. Okay. And by email would be the letter D, the letter K, the number 4, and the letter U at iCloud.com.
Very good.
DK4U@iCloud.com. Again, thanks for the opportunity to be on your show.
Yeah, it's great. Glad we finally got a chance to do it. We'll have to do this maybe towards the end of the year. Would be another good time to have you back on for a little bit and talk a look at how things are wrapping up, and maybe some suggestions for people getting into the New Year's, because that seems to be when people start kicking things and trying to figure out what they should do is when the New Year comes along.
As resolution time.
Yeah. All right, Dan. Thanks again for your time. I really appreciate it.
Most definitely. Have a great day.
All right. Take care, Dan. Dan Foss, this is Joe Cucchiara with Real Estate Radio Live. Thanks again for those that are joining in, and thanks again for listening and sharing the podcast. For more information, you could always go to RERL-1736-Small. Thanks again. Take care.
You've been listening to Real Estate Radio Live. For more information on today's program, visit RERadiolive.com. That's RERadiolive.com. Subscribe to our podcast. Discover more at RERadiolive.com.